Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're stepping into a world that really touches all our lives, but, remains largely unseen. We're looking at the incredibly demanding reality faced by medical doctors.
Yeah, it's a tough world. We're going deep into the challenges they navigate, things like burnout, the mental health toll, and that huge quest for balance.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've drawn on some really interesting sources.
hmm We've pulled insights mainly from the podcast series Doctors in Court. It features conversations with doctors, therapists, consultants, people really in the thick of it, often sharing personal stories.
And we've also looked at some other perspectives, right? Like from Cora and Doctor Advocate.
That's right, to get a broader picture.
So our mission today is basically to unpack the pressures doctors are under, understand the different layers, and crucially explore the strategies these sources offer. Ways to not just survive, but maybe even thrive.
Okay, let's get into it. And wow, the sheer scale of the problem. It hits you straight away. There's this perspective from Dr. Dominic Corrigan in the sources. He says fixing burnout in medicine is like trying to change the direction of the Titanic.
The Titanic. Wow, that really paints a picture, doesn't it? The sheer size and momentum of the problem.
It really does. And his own story is powerful, too. He's a recovering psychiatrist, actually left medicine himself. Burnout, depression, addiction. He went through it.
Yeah, he mentions being an overachiever and
Yeah.
talks about something called Corrigan's secret door. Said he didn't know about it until it was too late.
Makes you wonder what that door represents, doesn't it? Like maybe a path to asking for help or admitting vulnerability, something he felt cut off
It
from.
must have been incredibly difficult.
For sure. But he's channeled that now into advocacy. He's pushing for peer support, policy changes, innovation, and he co-founded Physicians Anonymous. It's basically a platform, a space for doctors to, understand and express their emotions.
So a safe space to talk.
Exactly. Talk, think differently, figure out how to do better for patients, but also for themselves.
And that need for a safe space, it seems directly linked to the culture they work in. Another source, this one featuring Silvia Liebaut, described the environment as just steeped in blame, guilt, intimidation, stress, negativity.
Yeah, that came through strongly. Doctors expected to be on almost, like 24/7.
Constantly on. How
Mhm.
can you function like that long term?
Well, you often can't. And that pressure, it takes a huge toll, which brings us to a really sensitive topic the sources cover. Suicide among doctors?
Uh-huh. Silvia Liebaut's episode highlighted this, didn't it? With a particular concern mentioned for female doctors.
Yes, and the impact, it's just devastating. For the family, obviously, but also colleagues, the whole community, really.
It's just heartbreaking. People dedicating their lives to healing others reaching that point. It makes you ask, what's missing? What support isn't there?
And that's where people like Silvia Liebaut come in. As a hypnotherapist, she's focused on sharing tools to prevent those really heightened states of anxiety, guilt, shame, the things doctors face when they're, contemplating their worst fears.
So it's about being proactive, giving them tools before a crisis hits.
Exactly. Building resilience, finding ways to cope. She uses this great metaphor, actually. Doctors are like a power bank. They power up everyone else, their patients, right? But the power bank itself needs recharging. You can't keep giving out energy if you're empty.
The power bank. I like that. It really grounds it in that basic human need, that human first idea. Maybe we can shift gears slightly. Look at some of the more day-to-day challenges. Sabine Fonderson's insights from Quora were interesting here.
Oh yeah, her stuff on Quora was apparently really popular, especially the bit about common mistakes first-time doctors make.
What sort of things came up?
Well, one that stood out was not listening to their spidey senses, that gut feeling, and something just feels off about a patient's situation.
Intuition. But maybe the doctors feel they can't trust it, or they second-guess themselves.
Probably. The pressure to be certain, right. And then there were more practical things mentioned too, like mislabeling blood tubes or writing the wrong medication route.
Right, although the sources did note that system changes, like automation, have made those specific errors less frequent now, thankfully.
True. But they still point to that high-pressure environment where small slip-ups could have big consequences or at least cause a lot of stress.
And alongside potential errors, there's just the grind, isn't there?
Yeah.
The long hours, the constant pressure we talked about earlier.
Definitely. And Sabine Fonderson also pointed out something quite worrying. New doctors often feel scared to complain about their own health problems to their peers.
Really? Scared to admit they're sick.
Yeah, like there's this pressure to be invincible, maybe, or a fear of looking weak in a profession that values strength so much. It creates this isolation.
That inability to show vulnerability, even physical vulnerability, it sounds incredibly isolating.
It really does. And speaking of emotional challenges, the sources also touched on something else. What does a doctor do when they, well, just don't like a patient?
Oh, that's a tricky one. What did Sabine Fonderson say about that?
It was fascinating, actually. The insight was that it's often not about personally disliking the patient as a person.
Oh, so what is it then?
It's more about the situation, the dynamic of the interaction, or maybe an emotion that gets triggered in the doctor during or after that consultation.
Ah, so it's about the emotional labor involved, the communication breakdown, perhaps.
Exactly. It might be frustration, stress, something triggered by that specific challenging encounter. The example given was an interaction that went poorly because of the doctor's triggered emotion, not because they disliked the patient fundamentally.
That reframes it quite a bit. It's not a personal failing, but a response to a difficult dynamic. Adds another layer of the weight they carry.
Precisely. So, okay. We've seen the big systemic issues, the human cost, the specific daily struggles. Let's maybe pivot now to solutions and hope.
Yes, please. Where do the sources point towards coping, or even thriving? It comes back to that question Sabine Fonderson asked. Can doctors actually achieve work-life balance?
Can they? The sources seem to suggest it's possible, maybe not balance in the perfect sense, but finding ways to thrive, yes. Silvia Liebaut, with the power bank idea. She also offered really practical strategies.
Like what?
Things like taking time for self-care before the day even starts, even just a few minutes. And crucially, protecting your time, signaling boundaries to colleagues.
Setting boundaries. That sounds essential, but probably hard to do in that culture.
Very hard, I'd imagine. And her main point, remember, you're human first. Fundamental needs like recharging have to be met. It sounds simple, but she framed them as almost revolutionary acts of self-care and medicine.
Giving yourself permission to be human. And another key theme seemed to be sharing experiences, right? Finding community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cherie Johnson, she's a psychologist, author, advocate. She really emphasizes that. Just starting by saying it out loud, sharing your experience, that's key to thriving.
Tell us more about her work.
Well, she coaches doctors specifically to thrive, not just cope. Talks about being present with patients, which links back to that emotional load. Her book, The Thriving Doctor, apparently offers solutions for feeling overwhelmed, lacking energy, includes her own story, too.
So she gets it firsthand.
Seems so. And she runs coaching programs like Recalibrate, and even started a book club just for doctors.
A book club for doctors, that's a great idea. Simple, but effective for building community, breaking that isolation.
It sounds like it.
Yep.
And then there's Dr. Claire Davies, also working in this space.
What's her focus?
She's a coach, also a GP, a family doctor, and a writer. She helps doctors who've had a, quote, wake-up call with their own health, helps them thrive again. She's really passionate about connected communities and focuses specifically on doctors who are patients themselves.
Dealing with that specific challenge we mentioned earlier, the doctor as patient.
Exactly. She's written about the guilt a sick doctor might feel, or the difficulties around confidentiality when you're on the other side. It's a really unique perspective.
So directly tackling that fear of vulnerability.
Right. Supporting them as whole people. And then finally, there was a quite different angle from Scott McKenzie.
Oh, yeah. What was his take?
His view involves looking at running a general practice more like a business. The idea is that this structure can actually put joy back into the work.
A business approach to improve well-being. How does that work?
Well, his background is sales and marketing, then healthcare consulting. He helps GP practices become more like independent businesses. His formula involves getting everyone to take ownership, having a clear vision, a proper workforce strategy for sustainable goals. He even touched on private services playing a role potentially.
Okay, so the thinking is, if the practice runs more efficiently, with clear structures, it reduces some of that background stress and pressure, frees doctors up a bit.
That seems to be the core idea. It's tackling the system to make the day-to-day less draining, maybe more rewarding. It complements the individual self-care and community strategies.
We've certainly covered a lot today. From those huge systemic pressures, the demanding culture.
Yeah, through to the mental health impact, the specific challenges like dealing with difficult interactions or even just making mistakes.
But what really comes through from all these different sources is this message of, well, possibility. Despite the scale, the Titanic analogy, there are paths forward.
Definitely. Strategies from basic self-care, setting boundaries, taking time to finding peer support, sharing stories, and even rethinking how practices are run.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to that core truth, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Doctors are humans first that need to recharge, to look after yourself. It gets lost sometimes in the structure of medicine.
It does, which kind of leaves us with the final thought, maybe a provocative one for you, the listener. Considering everything we've heard, the immense pressure, the potential strategies, what responsibility does the healthcare system itself, or maybe even society more broadly, have? What's our role in creating an environment where doctors can actually protect their own well-being and, really thrive, not just survive?